Here we go.
Bang!
I was just saying, I think the guys at the CBOE have got to love that, John. Up there with the clapper.
I think they do. And folks, you are tuned into the Rebel's Edge, Pete Najarian over there, from some undisclosed location as usual. And I am here at a very disclosed location because you can see the logo behind me. SIBO Global Markets. Yep. But tomorrow I'll be in LA, Pete. Actually, I'll be there today, but tomorrow when you and I shoot, I'll be in LA, probably at the Dream Hotel.
Damn it.
Oh, they're going crazy back there.
There's something going on back there. Yeah,
that's
is that a dream or a nightmare?
You never know. It depends how long you hold it. Welcome, folks. Pete and I do the Rebel's Edge 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We take Friday off for travel. I'll actually be traveling today and Friday, but I was able to arrange travel so that it wasn't until after the show today, so that works out. And we encourage you to follow us on Twitter. He's at Pete Najarian. I'm at John Najarian. Jared is the one putting up the clock, the dates, the topics, the Bulls and Bears fighting like that. The Bulls are winning today again. And the volatility's down to what, 1450 or so, Pete?
It's amazing. So, I mean, it's amazing. We had a really light day yesterday too, John, but you know, you and I were talking about this concert, and here I wanted to follow up with this because the State Fair, Minnesota State Fair, is always a lot, of fun. And you and I talked about it earlier today, but I think the Boys to Men concert that I saw might have been one of the very best I've seen. And I, you know, you and I talked a little bit about this, but how about the fact that these guys take a segment of their concert where they go away from who they are, and they played Eric Clapton, they played Beatles, they played Bruno Mars, they played Lenny Kravitz. I mean, it was amazing. And the talent level of those guys, I would encourage people to go and see these guys. And I went there kind of going, do I really want to see all these, you know, sappy songs these guys say? Their own songs were great too. So it was really a lot of fun. You know, in the State Fair every year, they usually have unbelievable acts. I think this year it's a little light, so I'm glad we at least caught this one because those guys in Shaka Khan were pretty fun.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of talent between both the four of them at Boys to Men and Shaka Khan for sure. All right, Pete, let's dive into what we usually start the program with, the Macro Minute. I saw that they said expectations for the next 6 months tumbled back near the recession lows of 80. So what we're talking about here, folks, is future business conditions, and the expectation is now 80.2, so just 0.2 of a point away from 80 versus 88 prior. So if you're somebody in business and you're saying, boy, I'm getting more and more bearish, that's why they're saying that perhaps we're going to see maybe the Fed pause more, Pete, and stay paused longer. And I think we can talk about that in Fantastic Futures.
Sure. Well, my macro is going to be really rapid. It's going to be the 10-year, John. And, you know, when you look, and the 2-year, and when you look at the 2-year, it got up above 5. It stayed up above 5 just for a few days. And here it is back down to 4.9. I know that sounds small, but that seems to be the trigger area. And then when you look at the 10-year, you know, we're off the recent highs. You were just talking about it before we came on here about where we are. We're off those recent highs. And I think it's pretty interesting because the month of August has been really rough, especially on the NASDAQ. But as it's gone up, it's also starting to kind of ease back a little bit more, it seems like, for the 10-year. And as that happens, it seems like there's a confidence level that's starting to get back into the markets. And we saw the NASDAQ move up pretty nice yesterday. We're seeing it again today. So I think a lot of that has to do with what's going on in some of these treasuries.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Pete. And I could have said for Fantastic Futures.
Yeah.
I could have said for that it's 4.12, the 10-year, and I just did. But what I'm going to cite, though, is the Bitcoin move. It's up $1,800 because, again, people generate yield with Bitcoin and so forth. And when the yields are going down on treasuries, Bitcoin goes the opposite direction normally. And it's certainly doing that today, Pete. It's up 7% today.
Yeah. Well, I'll just give you a real quickie on this one. How about the dollar? The dollar was just trading 104.36, and now we've dropped all the way back down. I just took a quick look. It's close to about 103.50 now. Doesn't sound big to a lot of people. That's actually a pretty big move in a very short period of time. So you've got a little bit of pressure on the dollar. You got a little bit of pressure on the 10-year as far as the yield, and the 2-year getting back underneath there, underneath 5. There's a few reasons why I think we're seeing this market get a little bit more legs today as well.
Well, speaking of legs, Pete, how about the leg up that Pinduoduo, or PDD, Chinese stock, is showing you today? Double-digit gain. They earned 1047 versus 713, so obviously pretty significant beat. Revenue was 53 billion versus 31 billion year over year. Positive shift in consumer sentiment. I do have to question a little bit of that, Pete, just because I don't know where these Chinese consumers are getting bulled up, because all we see is how the Chinese government's having to take interest rates down towards zero again. But if this is what they're saying, that's why the stock is moving.
Well, their numbers are their numbers. Now, we sometimes do question some of the economic numbers coming out of China. At least you and I always have, John, because we're the two guys who actually figured out that these guys are not like the US of A. So, so there's a lot of different things going on. And are they always accurate? Well, to your point, this PDD, they talked about how the customer base seems to get more positive all the time. And if these numbers are correct, and I say if only because sometimes we do question some of these things, but it looks like they've absolutely crushed it, John. If you want a perfect looking balance sheet, take a look at PDD. I mean, it looks absolutely outrageously strong. It's impressive. A free cash flow of $43 billion. They talked about demand picking up. Like you said, it seems like it's exactly the opposite of what was reported a week or so ago from the Chinese, but in this particular case, you got to go with what you go with. And that's why this stock is up, what, 16, 17, 18% today, something like that. And a heck of a lot closer to those 52-week highs than they were.
Absolutely correct, Pete. It's really an outperformer among all of them in China today. Now we're going to hit Catalent, because this is a company that Elliott Management really put a lot of pressure on them. And they're, of course, an activist investor. They invest, and then they want to put people on the board and things like that, because they say, hey, we think you're not doing things as right as you need to, and for that reason we're going to put some oversight on you. They're expanding the board, Pete, and people outside of Catalent really like it. Stocks up somewhere between 5 and 7% today on the news that Elliott Management's getting 4 board seats on Catalent.
Yeah, and they're one of the biggest shareholders there, John. As you mentioned, I think that's the really important part, is what they said about, hey, and they did say, this isn't forever. We're not expecting to see this expansion to 16 board members forever. They're going to come back down to 12, but they wanted to be a part of it because of the large investment they got. And when you look at where that stock's been over the last 52 weeks or so, it's a heck of a lot closer to the lows than the highs in that case, and still is. Even with this 5 to 7% move, they are much closer to those 52-week lows. So did they have an outlook that was strong? Yes. Did they have numbers that looked terrible? Yes. In the present quarter. So people always do look ahead, though. And this is less about that, but I think that's important to point out, is they did have a powerful outlook going out, but I think it's really all about the fact that they are getting Elliott as part of the board. And because of that, I think a lot of people think that there could be some strategic reasons for that. And we'll see what happens as it plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say, Pete, that, you know, these guys were a big player with COVID, and they took a lot of revenue from COVID. So if you've got COVID not being in the headlines, despite some people trying to push that narrative again, it's not in the headlines, thank God. And for that reason, they have to find other levers to pull. All right, NIO. a day doesn't go by that you and I don't talk about some sort of a Chinese EV, Pete. And in this case, their numbers were just not good. The company's shares are trading down almost double digits. They earned or lost 80 cents versus a loss of 213. So that's better year over year, but it's still not doing what Pete really wants to see and what most investors would demand, which is you got to start making money. And these guys are not doing that. And the deliveries, again, total deliveries, Pete, 23,000. I mean, Tesla does better than that every single week. Yeah. And these guys are announcing a quarter of 23,000. That's why NIO's getting hit.
I agree with you. They're struggling. Their finances are getting a little bit weaker all the time because of the struggles that they've been under. They got 6% lower on the deliveries than they did year over year. How about some of these other numbers, John, that are just staggering? Their margins are getting squeezed. The sales are down 25% year over year. Revenue's down 15% year over year. And their profits are only down 93%. So there's a few things going on behind the scenes here with this company. And I think it is concerning. I mean, we've talked about this name and so many different EV names over the last, probably call it 5-6 years. And this is one of those names that you look at outside of Tesla and Nikola and all the rest. And you look to NIO to just see how are they doing. Well, from the looks of things, they ain't doing too good. And I don't think this is one of those falling knives that you need to jump out there and say, you know what, it's going to bounce, baby. These guys are going to come through. I don't see that happening right now, John.
Yeah, and like to Pete's point about the margins, folks, gross margin, we know there's a net and there's a gross. The gross margin shrunk to 1%. That's because Elon's cutting prices over at his side. So these guys being competitive and trying to be competitive more or less had to cut their prices. That's the gross. That's why they're losing 80 cents, because if you're down to 1% gross margin from 13%, you're not making any money at all. I mean, basically it's almost like, you know what, just close it up. We'll do better for a couple quarters. All right, let's talk about Coinbase, Pete. I saw some old friends of ours trying to talk about, oh, Coinbase, well, you know, what's going on with Coinbase? They're up real strong today. And one of the reasons they were up real strong, of course, was that the court ruled, an appeals court, that the SEC was wrong to reject the Grayscale application for a spot Bitcoin ETF. The other reason might be that, as we said at the top of the show, really, in the fantastic futures, Bitcoin's up $1,800 today. So that's a big 7% move. And I'd say, folks, that the unusual activity that Pete and I saw, because people came scrambling in there and they were buying upside calls in Coinbase, that's another sign that maybe they think this thing can keep going towards 30 again, Pete, which would be our upside target.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's an interesting one, John. You talked about it already, but you know, this whole thing with Grayscale and so forth and what Coinbase is trying to do. But I'll tell you, and it's not just Coinbase, guys. I mean, when you look at Bitcoin, you look at different things in the crypto space, you'll see what we're talking about. John mentioned already this monstrous move that we're getting off of those lows from Bitcoin itself, off of what, 26,000, John, and it's up 1,800. I mean, that's an amazing run. That's an amazing run to the upside. But, you know, there's a lot of different other things. And I would point out, like I oftentimes do, they got a pretty good size short in here as well. So when you've got those shorts and they're running and they're chasing, this could have been maybe, let's just say, an 8% move, a 10% move. Oh, no, it's an 18% move, a 20% move, because of the fact that you've got shorts somewhere between 10 and 15% of what we're looking at here in this stock. It's amazing how much that still is working very, very well, John. And it's been a strategy for a lot of people as well. When they see a large short position and it's starting to move, they start running for it. And I'll tell you, these moves have been absolutely spectacular. They continue to be today.
Yeah, it's not just Grayscale, folks. That's part of the part of the drive. But the other catalyst is that $1,800 move to the upside of Bitcoin. Yeah. All right, Pete, take over with sports. What do you got for us today?
Well, I got two in this little category of
A
baseball.
twofer.
Yeah, twofer. Because one of them is just a quickie, but I got to run it by you, John. You and I were talking about this. You sent me the article, and I'm looking at it. This Acuna, now great baseball player, right? And they're playing in Colorado, and suddenly he's standing out there, and the next thing he knows, he's turning around, and there's guys running at him, and this poor guy standing there going, "Hey, security, is there any security here?" Well, at the Mile High, the cannabis levels of this place get pretty interesting. These guys are sprinting out onto the field to this poor guy. What did you think about that? I mean, they've got to figure out how to be a little bit better. I'll tell you one thing, and then I'll hear your answer to this. But at the Twins games, they're all former Stillwater State Penn guards that are standing there. I know that because my buddy runs security there. And if you run on that field, you're going to regret it. So you will not see that happen in Minnesota. But you did see it happen in Colorado because they probably got a bunch of slappies out there wearing yellow vests just going, "Oh, geez, I wonder what the score is in the game," because they ran right by him. And then they knocked him to the ground, John. Acuna's sitting there going, are you kidding me? They didn't hurt him. And they kind of wanted to come out and get a selfie, but that's really not okay, right?
No. And Pete, that guy Acuna, other than our friend that you and I talk about a lot, Ellie De La Cruz, he's one of the fastest base runners in the history of baseball. So thank God he wasn't injured. But he has more stolen bases this year, Pete, just himself, than 3 or 4, I forget which it is, of the major league teams. So this guy is a phenom. And yeah, you got to protect these guys. Pete and I talked a little bit, folks, about how Messi, the world phenom soccer player, how he's got a Navy SEAL that runs up and down the sidelines following him. Not on the field, not on the pitch, as they say, but on the sideline, basically making sure that nobody is coming from that nearby sideline and trying to get Messi, because then it would get messy, Pete.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, don't mess with the Navy SEAL would be my advice. And I don't care what, he could be 160 pounds or 225. Don't mess with him because they got you. I got to highlight this guy, John. He's plays for the Twins, and that's not the only reason. He did something yesterday that was very special. He is the first player in a heck of a long time, and it's a very short list. He hit 2 consecutive games where he had a grand slam in both. I mean, unbelievable, right? His name is Royce Lewis. Keep that name in your heads because he's an outstanding player, plays for the Minnesota Twins, but he's been more injured than healthy. Because of that, he's in and out, and he's not in the lineup very often. But when he is, the guy is special, John. He's had 10 home runs this year. 3 of them are grand slams. I mean, this guy's got a little something special going on here in Minnesota.
You bet he does, Pete. He was their number 1 pick. I looked him up. He was their number 1 pick in 2017. Kid's only 24 years old. So if he's getting that eye for, especially hitting with runners in scoring position or bases loaded, like you said, that was the first Twin, Pete, to ever hit grand slams in consecutive games. So, fabulous performance by him. And I'm sure the fans loved it.
Oh, yeah. And he's been talked about a lot here. So the people of Minnesota do know of him. It's probably the rest of the country because of his few games that he's played that they don't know who his name is. Royce Lewis. I'll say it one last time because the guy is special. You're going to be hearing about that guy more and more. John, I always like this time of year and hate this time of year. And why is that? Because it's cut day today. And we start figuring out what goes on in the NFL and who's where. And it doesn't mean they're done. They could get picked up by somebody else. And we're seeing a lot of trades, actually. I don't know if I've seen so many trades right up to this little cutting deadline that we're looking at right now, but we have seen a lot in the NFL. So here's 2 guys that I was reading about that both are on the cutting edge and probably for the right reasons, but I got to run them by you anyway because it's kind of amazing. The first one I'll run by you is Marcus Mariota. He was part of the quarterbacks thing on Netflix, right? Number 1 on Netflix for a number of days or weeks, and it was pretty impressive. Loved watching it. You had Mariota. You had Mahomes, one of the best in the game today. You also had Kirk Cousins, who a lot of people don't appreciate how good Kirk's actually been playing the last couple of years. And then you had Marcus Mariota, who can't seem to be able to get to where he once was, John. Heisman Trophy winner. He's a second pick in the draft or whatever the year he comes out. And he's a heck of a player, but he just cannot get it right. So he goes from team to team to team trying to find a spot. And I can't figure it out myself, because the only thing I can tell you is if anybody watched that series quarterback, he just doesn't have a fire right here. You know, when I'm watching and I see Mahomes and I see some of these other quarterbacks and Josh Allen and some of the other names that we talk about all the time, they are fired up, John. They are confident and they are ready to play at all times. They're watching film. Marcus does watch film. He does that stuff. He just doesn't seem like this is his passion. And I'll tell you, if football's not your passion, you shouldn't do it. And I just wonder what the problem is here. So in 8 years, he's got 92 touchdowns. That's actually not so bad. 54 interceptions. That's pretty bad. So, you know, kind of basically call it 2 for 1. That's not really the numbers that you want, this Heisman Trophy winner and all the rest of it. And then you got Matt Barkley, who a lot of people think he's out at Buffalo. He's been the backup to Josh Allen. He's been the backup to just about everywhere where he's been. And he's a name from USC, played on some good teams, all the rest of it. But he looks like he's going to maybe get cut. Sure looks like it. So we'll see. But what do you think about these guys, and should they be cut? And what are your thoughts on a guy like Mariota, who was so good at Oregon, and he got in the NFL in his first year? He was great. And then since then, it's just been stair-stepping down.
Yeah, it's almost unbelievable, Pete. Of course, we've all seen number one picks from a whole host of teams get washed out. But this was a kid that, you know, really had what we thought was magic in a bottle. Because, you know, his coach came up with, you know, the idea of holding up, you know, cue cards and things like that from the sideline, no huddle offense. And he was able to run that in that kind of pressure, because that is pressure. Yep. You know, rather than having a huddle, he's calling everything at the line of scrimmage based on what he was seeing from the coach and the players that are holding up those placards on the sideline. So he seemed to be in a great position to make quick decisions like you need to do when you're an NFL quarterback. But outside of that first year, like you say, he hasn't done that. And, you know, there's this guy, Jonathan Taylor, a running back, who's a great running back for Indy, but a lot of people thought he might, that Kansas City might look at him because, you know, Edwards-Helaire had slipped to number 3 on the depth chart at KC. So there are some big, you know, top round picks that are starting to slip for a whole host of reasons. Passion, that could be one of them. Maybe you didn't work hard enough in the offseason. Maybe you don't like watching films, like what we've heard from some of the quarterbacks, like the Arizona quarterback and things like that. I think, and to your point, Pete, with the amount of money that you can make being just a starter in the NFL, I can't imagine that you wouldn't have passion for the game and for all the people that would love to be in the same position that that player's in. But you're right, Mariota just hasn't had it since that first season.
Yeah, and Barkley does have it, and I think he's a decent backup quarterback, but he's not special, so you can understand why there's guys in front of him. There's a kid out of Stanford. They have a little connection to California boys, John, because people who don't know it, Josh Allen's originally from California, then played at Wyoming. But then you got Barkley, you know, and now you've got this kid from Stanford there that they drafted late, but he's a big, strong kid, John, 6'6", 240-pound quarterback who could throw the ball pretty well, throws too many interceptions. But you brought up Edwards-Helaire, and I'll tell you, that's an interesting one because that was on my list as well. Top 3 guys that probably could get cut, and he's sitting there.
Bubble. Yeah.
And remember, John, it was just 2 years ago, the guy was the rookie running back out of LSU, and everybody was just saying, geez, this guy's special. We're seeing something like we haven't seen in a long time out of a running back, and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, great player out of LSU and all the rest. But it just seems like he's been, you know, unfortunately sinking. And to your point, he might be right on that bubble where maybe he stays, maybe he goes. And if he does go, somebody likely picks him up. But, you know, it's amazing how these guys just all of a sudden, whether it's their heart or whatever, and I'm not calling them out for being bad guys, but sometimes it's just not your passion. And as I've said to any kid who ever asks me, high school kids especially, I'm like, if it's not your passion, don't do it. Too many injuries, too much pain, too much of this. But if it's your passion, it's the greatest sport ever. So, you know, you got either here or here, but you better figure it out.
Exactly. Well, all you need to figure out, folks, is that we will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time, because that's Wednesday. So we've got Wednesday and Thursday coming at you for the Rebels Edge. There isn't a show in biz media that gets more eyeballs than this one. So congratulations for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern time.